So it is October of 2023, and we're finally done releasing all of the GPUs for this generation. I think it gives us a nice buffer to now see what the prices are and what the best deals are, because it can be very easy to just buy the wrong GPUs at this point in time. And I just want to help you guys out with this. So let's go ahead and jump in, and we're going to go ahead and break down every price bracket. And obviously we're going to be starting at the bottom of the pack, and that is going to be the $200 price point. And what is being offered here? Not really a whole lot. $280 is NVIDIA's lowest price card from this generation, and AMD's lowest price card as an entry-level option. That's kind of expensive for a lot of people. So most people, I think, to enter into the market, probably going to be looking at like a $200 card. And from AMD on the new market, we're looking at the RX 6600. And I do have this card and I have tested it. It performs pretty well for $200. And NVIDIA is bizarrely offering an RTX 3050 at around this price point. It's still more expensive than the 6600, but funnily enough, the RTX 3050 is significantly slower. And the NVIDIA advantage of getting ray tracing at this price point, the 3050 isn't going to be doing a ray tracing at $215. So just write that off the table. Don't even bother with ray tracing at this low of a price point. This is entry-level GPU. The only advantage to getting the 3050 would be to get DLSS, and honestly, at 1080p, you really shouldn't be upscaling at all because it just doesn't look that good. So I don't think DLSS is that big of a feature at this price point. Although we do have another competitor entering the market here, and that would be Intel. And Intel is offering an A750 for $220. So it is actually significantly more expensive than the 6600 at this point in time. We have seen this card go on sale for about $190, so it does go lower, but we've also seen the 6600 go for, $180 at some points in time. But if you compare the A750 to the 6600 here, from my experience, it is faster as well from my tests. I own both of these cards and I've been able to test that. A750 is generally faster than the 6600. The A750 does have some reliability problems even to this day, even though Intel is rolling out, performance updates constantly and improving this card. It still has some issues in certain games, and the 6600 is way more consistent. So at this price point where you're only going to have access to one GPU, you're at like $200. And if you're stuck with one card, I think you want the most reliable option, unless the A750 was significantly faster than the 6600. Honestly, I'm leaning towards AMD at $200 for the 6600. Although that doesn't mean it's the best deal or the best budget entry-level option out there. If you're willing to go on the used market nowadays, and I've done some head-to-heads and I have an upcoming video on this soon, comparing the 6600 to the 5700 XT and stuff. This card, the RX 5700 XT, is about 4 years old at this point in time, but it's really not bad in terms of power efficiency. It's 2 generations old. It performs really well for this price, and you can get this card for about $130 to $140 on the used market right now. Pretty readily available. Like, this is buy it now pricing. And this card is faster than the 6600. But, that comes with the downside of buying on the used market. If you get a new card, then you get warranties and you basically guarantee that it's going to work. And if it doesn't work, then you can just send it back and get another one. And if you do buy something used, I would recommend that you go through a seller on a website like eBay, which does cover your returns and stuff like that most of the time. Double check it. Sometimes it won't, but just make sure you get that 30-day return policy. eBay will have your back. I've had to use the eBay return thing before, and it works perfectly fine. They gave me my money back. If you want to go NVIDIA, because we saw the 3050 on the new market is the only option here, and it's just a bad option from NVIDIA. So if you do want to get this, I'd recommend getting the RTX 2070. This card is just about the same age as the 5700 XT. They perform really similarly, and rasterization performance is going to be about $40 to $50 more than the 5700 XT on the used market. It technically gives you ray tracing, but I wouldn't really put a bunch of weight on that. Again, you're not going to be ray tracing at this price point. Just set your expectations in line. You do get access to DLSS with the 2070. So if you are going to be, say, playing at 1440p and you want the best upscaling that's possible with the card, then I would probably recommend going with NVIDIA. But if you want to go back to the new market, like you don't want to buy used, recommend actually not getting the 6600. I know this is the most budget option card, but if you stretch your budget just $20 more to get a 6650 XT, then you're going to get a significant leap in performance. According to Tech Power up here, it's 25% faster than the 6600. And that means that, you know, for $20 more, for 10% more money, you're getting 25% more performance. And to me, that's completely worth it. If you can stretch your budget 20 more bucks, it is worth every penny. But the other option at this price point would be to, if you want to get on the newest generation of cards, you could get a 7600 from AMD. This is RDNA 3 architecture, the 6650 XT, and the 7600, which costs $30 more right now, literally perform the same. And if you do look at other benchmarks, this holds up. The 6650 XT and 7600 are basically the exact same card. They're even the same in like terms of power efficiency and stuff like that too. The only advantage to getting it is if you really want AV1 video encoding. That's the only advantage to getting the 7600. Other than that, really both of them have access to FSR3 frame generation, and I'd probably recommend getting the 6650 XT. If you would need NVIDIA, then your lowest price option on, you know, the new market, I think is the best value, is the RTX 4060. The 4060 is just about the same speed as the 7600 and the 6650 XT, but you're paying $30 more for it. I don't think the advantages to getting the 4060, you're not going to be ray tracing at this price point either. The 4060 still isn't going to be ray tracing for $280, but you do get access to DLSS upscaling. So if you wanted to play at 1440p, or if you were going to upscale at 1080p, that might be a factor for you. But that's about it when it comes down to it. Unless you need an NVIDIA GPU for work or whatever, you know, hobbies or whatever you have. Look, the 6650 XT is, you know, $60 cheaper than the RTX 4060 right now, and it performs about the exact same. If you're going to go all the way up to the $300 price point, what I'd actually recommend going for is an RX 6700 XT, which is a last generation graphics card from AMD. The 6700 XT is on average about 15% faster than these other graphics cards that we're comparing it to. $320 right now. You get more VRAM. It's going to be more capable at 1440p, which I know a lot of people are upgrading and getting their first monitors as 1440p monitors now because they're not that expensive. And 12 gigabytes of VRAM is going to probably last you for a few years, whereas 8 gigabytes and a lot of games is becoming pretty limiting. The only other option you have is an RTX 3060 Ti, which is about the same speed as the 6700 XT. But again, you're getting to the performance where playing at 1440p is actually conceivable. Having 8 gigabytes of VRAM on a $320 card compared to getting a 6700 XT, which has more VRAM than it's just a hard sell. If you want to use your graphics card in any type of like modern games and into a few years into the future, like even if you aren't playing the new games right now, what if you want to play the new games when they're discounted or something like that a few years down the line? And all of a sudden, you're going to be wishing you had the 6700 XT. I've seen a lot of benchmarks of these. I mean, these perform most of the time the same. Now the 3060 Ti, in terms of ray tracing though, you could argue that a 3060 Ti could be worth it in terms of ray tracing. It's starting to get to a usable level if you're playing at 1080p, but you also have to consider ray tracing uses more VRAM as well. And again, I would just prefer to lean towards performance. This card isn't going to give you a very desirable level of ray tracing at all either, especially with 8 gigabytes of VRAM. That it just seems like the 6700 XT is a lot better at this price point. And now, if you do want to get a little bit of a performance uplift with the 6700 XT, $350, the 6750 XT is generally speaking about 6% faster. You pretty much just pay an even amount of percentage of money for a percentage increase in performance. And it's basically linear scaling. So if you have a little bit more money to spend, you might as well just get the 6750 XT. As we start to kind of approach $400 right now, we have options like the RTX 4060 Ti. And now this card at this price point has 8 gigabytes of VRAM. Oh, we got a cat walking on the desk. Oh, what is she? She's gonna jump down? Well, she's gonna scratch her face. Go just to Tech Power Up. Generally speaking, the 4060 Ti 8 gigabyte is only a little bit faster than the 6700 XT, but you're still paying, even months after it launched, you're still paying $50 more in order to get this card, and it has less VRAM. Yes, you get DLSS 3 frame generation, but it is a hard sell, man. It's about the same speed, less VRAM, costs more. Really, what is your option if you want to go to $400? Well, it's actually to go on last generation RDNA 2 AMD cards with the RX 6800. Now this card at $400, like this is how much VRAM the 4060 Ti should have. 16 gigabytes of VRAM, pretty capable 1440p graphics card. Look at the performance charts here. It is topping all of these cards here. So if we want to look at the 4060 Ti specifically, half the VRAM as the 6800 as well. The 6800 is about 16% faster than the 4060 Ti. It draws about 200 watts or so, I'm pretty sure. And it's really not that bad in terms of power efficiency. And this card is just like a better deal all around. Like, wouldn't you want more VRAM for the same price point? Now, AMD has recently released another card called the 7700 XT, and this card goes for about $430. This draws about the same power as the 6800, and it has about the same performance as the 6800. For 12 gigabytes of VRAM and costing $40 more, the 7700 XT is a absolutely garbage deal at that price point. The only reason that you get the 7700 XT, it's a very similar story to the 7600. If you really want AV1 video encoding, if you're a creator and you find AV1 very important, I gotta be honest, like using HEVC or H.265 encoding, which the 6800 does have, is just, it's still very high quality. It'll still be very space efficient, and you don't really need AV1. So I'm not sure if I would pay $40 more to get less VRAM just to get AV1 encoding. Like, you gotta really want it at this price point, and I don't think it's worth it. But the card that I do think is worth it is actually if you want to buy on the used market. Okay, so an RTX 3080, which is faster than both of these cards, 20% faster than a 7700 XT, is actually going on the used market $400 and has been for a while. These cards are the best deal on the used market right now. 10 gigabytes of VRAM, so less VRAM, but the VRAM is extremely fast because it has a 320-bit bus, makes it really fast at 1440p and stuff like that. Now, this card does draw like 350 watts of power, so make sure you have enough power in your power supply. And buying used on the used market is just like, another fear. Actually fast enough to use ray tracing a good amount of the time, not like full path tracing, like in Cyberpunk or in Alan Wake 2 that's coming up here. It is very capable at 1440p, and you might be able to use some ray tracing. Having DLSS at 1440p with this card is actually a very good upside. But if you do want an alternative on the used market, you could get the 6800 XT, which have started to come down on the used market. These used to be like $450, and they're starting to look a lot better. So you can get a 6800 XT for about $410 to $420. It seems like a nice number, by the way. And this card is about the same amount of performance as the 3080 right now, but the 6800 XT does have 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and especially for the long-term future, that is a lot more of a safeguard. So if you aren't that concerned about ray tracing, and I just made a video about how ray tracing isn't really that important, DLSS isn't a deal breaker to you. I also made a video on DLSS versus FSR and everything if you want to check that out. Like at 1440p, the 6800 XT is actually fast enough to not use upscaling a lot of the time if you don't want to. Pretty much a toss up between the 3080 and the 6800 XT at this $400 price point on the used market if you're interested in buying used. But for all those who are interested in buying used, let's go ahead and move on. If you want to spend a little bit more money, then the card that I do actually think is a decent deal on the new market is the 7800 XT. With my testing and stuff, I was able to test this, and it's about the same performance as the 6800 XT and the 3080. It'll be a little bit faster than those cards, but not significantly. You do get AV1 video encoding. You still get 16 gigabytes of VRAM, which makes it a pretty good deal at this price point. The 7800 XT is also more power efficient than these other cards. It only draws like around 200 or a little over 200 watts. But actually, NVIDIA's RTX 4070, now this 4070 is slower than the 7800 XT generally speaking, according to this. I don't own a 4070 to test this, but you do get DLSS 3 frame generation. In order to use frame generation properly, you need to be getting at least like 60 FPS to get it like a good experience. And with the 4070, you can usually achieve over 60 FPS, so you could actually be using frame generation if that is important to you. So ray tracing at this price point with this performance of card is actually going to be somewhat usable. So if you do weigh at all into ray tracing Again, I'm not a huge fan of ray tracing. I have a 3080. I don't use ray tracing, so that gives you any reference point. And I will play some more visually intensive games as well. So if you're interested in ray tracing, I wouldn't cut yourself short. I would spend the extra money and get the 4070. You don't want to be kicking yourself later. It is kind of a toss-up. It sucks that you lose out on some VRAM with the RTX 4070, but you do get access to DLSS. 4070 does draw a similar amount of power as the 7800 XT, so it's not really a big difference between power consumption. If you were to look at these cards, the 4070 right now, if you go to say Newegg, for example, you do get a game with it. So if you value Alan Wake 2 at all, currently there is a promotion going on to get Alan Wake for free if you get an RTX 4070. I'm not sure on all cards if this applies, but if you don't enjoy the game, there's probably a way that you could sell it for another like 40 bucks or so, and then that would be bringing the price of the 4070, especially if you really want NVIDIA at this price point, really more in line with like $510 or so. And that would bring it really close to the 7800 XT in terms of price. But the $500 price point is kind of interesting on the market. And actually only the first GPU that NVIDIA on the new market is kind of interesting. Because everywhere else, unless on the used market, NVIDIA's cards on with their 40 series just aren't good. Like compared to even last generation RDNA 2 graphics cards, there's no reason to get NVIDIA up to this point if you're just after like gaming performance and stuff. Now, if you have other workloads, that's completely up to you. I mean, people are gonna have different situations and stuff like that. If you are just mainly after gaming performance, you might do some stuff on the side. AMD cards are perfectly fine for that. I've tested AMD cards with Blender and with video editing and stuff. They run perfectly fine. Even in video editing, generally speaking, rendering out videos is faster on AMD cards than NVIDIA's graphics cards. So that's even something to take into account. If you want to go up to like $600, okay? Now, it used to be pretty recommended to get an RX 6950 XT, which is last generation's AMD's flagship graphics card at 16 gigabytes of VRAM. But I don't think this is that good of a deal anymore, in my personal opinion. The 7800 XT is actually about the same speed as this card, and it costs $500. So I think that card made the 6950 XT obsolete. So if you don't want to get a $500 or $550 graphics card, you're really going up to like $700. We've seen the 7900 XT, come down to $760 at times. But we've also seen this card come all the way down to $700 flat, and that was just recently. So if you do watch some deals, you could get a 20 gigabyte 7900 XT pretty readily available at $700 sometimes, just with some flash sales or even on Black Friday or something. If you're looking for that, I bet this card's going to come down to $700 again by the end of the year. This card's going to be very capable at 1440p, basically max out every game, maybe except for turning ray tracing on. 20 gigabytes of VRAM is going to do you long good into the future. That's one big plus about this card. The option from NVIDIA, if you want to jump up to $800, will be the RTX 4070 Ti. Oh, this card's actually coming down in price. Oh, that's kind of interesting. $770. So this is actually pretty competitive with the 7900 XT now. But for $770, like this is like the same situation that the 4060 Ti was in. It's overpriced for how little VRAM it has. $770, that is so much money. Like this is a big investment and you want it to last for quite a few years. And even if in the future you'd want to resell this card, I feel like it's going to struggle to resell it. The VRAM is eventually going to be a limiting factor at this price point. Right now, it's not that big of a deal, but we can already see some games getting pretty close to 12 gigabytes. A normal lifespan for a card nowadays is like 4 years plus. 4 years down the road, I could see games using 12 gigabytes of VRAM. And that just makes the 4070 Ti a hard sell at this price point. And that makes the 7900 XT, even though the 4070 Ti has access to DLSS and frame generation, it makes the 7900 XT a much better deal at that price point. Now, the only other option I can really think of, you're still at this price point, you're willing to buy used, you can get RTX 3090s, a lot of VRAM. You're not going to have DLSS 3 frame generation or anything like that, but you do have access to DLSS upscaling, and the power efficiency is pretty terrible in these cards, just to let you know. But generally speaking, it seems like for about $660 or around $700 to $750, you could get a 3090 that's a little bit slower than these cards, and you could get that with 24 gigabytes of VRAM. That's the main draw about this card. Beyond this price point, we're starting to get to where there's less and less options for cards, obviously. It's just like, this is the upper end flagship graphics cards. So if you're really after performance and you're willing to, you know, spend $900 on a graphics card, you can get a 24 gigabyte 7900 XTX for $900. $900, it's a pretty good deal. If you look at the performance charts here from Tech Power Up, you can see that generally speaking, you know, you pay $900 versus $760 or something right now on the new market for these other cards. You get 20% more performance with the 7900 XTX, which generally speaking does make it worth it at $900. You do get that more VRAM as well. But honestly, 20 gigabytes on the 7900 XT is going to be plenty. And if you wanted to go in NVIDIA at this price point, well, your only real option is the RTX 4080, which is coming in at around $1,100 right now. So $200 more. At this price point, you're spending over $1,000. It might be worth it to get the 4080, to get DLSS, to get slightly better power efficiency than the 7900 XTX. Is not that much better. 16 gigabytes of VRAM, I think, is going to be enough for quite a while on the 4080. So I wouldn't really be concerned about that versus 24 gigabytes on the 7900 XTX. But the real thing is that better ray tracing performance. I mean, you're on a card that costs this much. It's actually fast enough to use ray tracing. This card is fast enough to do RT overdrive in Cyberpunk, not that well, but it's able to do it. If you really want to use ray tracing, you're balling out of control, and you're willing to spend $200 more than on the 7900 XTX, then generally speaking, I think the 4080 is probably worth the price jump, which kind of sucks because this card is still so freaking expensive. If you're spending that much, I'd be leaning towards just getting the best thing that you can get, and that is the 4080. The 7900 XTX and the 4080, in terms of rasterization performance, so not ray tracing, perform about the same. And there's tons of benchmarks out there about this. They're about the same. You know, that leaves us to our last graphics card. If money is no object on a PC build, get an RTX 4090. It's the fastest card out there. It's faster than anything else. So it's still 24% faster than a 7900 XTX. And yeah, this card costs over $1,600. So if you got that kind of money, you know, maybe let me have some too. But I don't know what to say. If you have this kind of money, just get the 4090. Like, this whole video, why did you even watch this? It doesn't matter. But this is my best GPUs at every price point, all the way down from the used graphics cards on the budget and entry level market, which is kind of underserved nowadays. I really wish we had some new cards in that market, make it more interesting. Deals in there, I think around the $500 price point. The RTX 4070 and the 7800 XT are looking pretty interesting nowadays. And if you're still around that mid-range graphics card to get into 1440p gaming, I still think the best deal out there is the 6700 XT at around $320 right now with 12 gigabytes of VRAM. Let me know what you guys think about how these things have progressed over time. Obviously, this whole generation is now out there. That allows us to just kind of look at this and reflect on the whole situation. It's been a year since these cards started to launch, and now they're all finally out. I wanted to make this just to, you know, clear the air. And especially as prices have settled a little bit, and we've seen some deals as well, are probably going to be the best deals and sales and everything for the future. So I hope this helps you, and Godspeed. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one. Peace.